Welcome everyone to another edition of Black Ignorance is a $1 billion industry. I am your host, Emmanuel Kulu, here from IBP Media, representing the founder of ARIA, Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. And today we're going to be talking about America and the war on Black history. This is a topic of discussion today. It's very important for those in diversity and inclusion departments. So please make sure you are locked in here. First and foremost, I want to send a shout out to our sponsors out there of the Arc Erie County for showing so much support to the movement of ARIA to change the narrative of ancient Africa, which is not just the history of the Black man, but it is the history of all people. So let's jump right in. Feel free to post a comment below. I will respond if you have any questions based on the discussion today. And if you would like to be a part of this particular segment that I have every week, feel free to DM me and we can talk about possibly collaboration, having a discussion on changing the narrative on ancient Africa, something that interests you or something of that sort, so that we could continue to raise knowledge right here in this world that we live in today. So, the attack on African history. It is my firm belief that the attack on African history is more the attack on the intellect of the Black mind around the world. The United States has become the engine of the media, the engine of higher education, and you know this war on Black history more has to do with rulership and control of the world, control of the raw materials in Africa, control over the resources in Central America, South America, the Caribbean islands, places predominantly where Black people and colored people live. So if you really start to think about some of our pioneers here in America, you have Dr. Carter G. Wilson, who started what was known as African History Week. And he was trying to just start something to raise the awareness of African people, to know something about themselves. And if you take a think about this, many people have bought into this rhetoric, even Black people. And we have seen, we've seen Black people distancing themselves from Africa because of the miseducation that they have been taught for centuries now. It's a big issue. But not only that, when you deny access, knowledge of the African ancestors, of the people who came before us, what we call today history, when that's being kept from you, how could you know your next step? How could you know your next step if you don't know your last step? If you don't know where you've been, how you know where you're going? You see, this is what African people throughout the world find themselves in, is not knowing our last step. Because if you really think about in America, Black folks didn't really particularly get into the news media writing or publications until the 1930s, 1940s. So the media was being controlled by Westerners, okay? The media, the education was being controlled by Eurocentric scholarship. So how did Africans have access to knowing who they were prior to transatlantic slave trade? So this is a big key factor in why America put a war against Black history. Now, it's clear and evident from guys like Constantine de Volney that they were quite aware of the great things that Black people did in the ancient days. I mean, we're talking about his in the 1700s, his trip to Egypt, when I quote, he mentioned Just think, this very race of black men today subject to our scorn is the very race that we owe our art, science, and even our use of speech. So this is Constantine Devoni, but he understood black history. I mean, you have a course called Egyptology. It's the only course named after a region. Okay. And it's a region in Africa. So clearly, this was something that was of interest to European people for studying antiquity, ancient Egypt, ancient black history. Okay. And it had to be controlled. The storytelling of Egypt, when it came through European and Eurocentric scholarship, it had to be controlled storytelling. And you hear more about Cleopatra more than you hear about, Hatshepsut or Queen Tia. You hear more about the Greek and the Roman emperors who and their descendants who ruled Egypt for a very short period of time, by the way. And really, Cleopatra had no significance to what the ancient Kemites did before her. She really was of no relevance, So when people always throw Cleopatra was black or she was this or she was that, and they debate about that, I don't really care about Cleopatra because she didn't do anything great for Egypt. And if anybody can help me with or enlighten me to what great Cleopatra did for Egypt, she did nothing great. All she did was ally with the world power at the time, which was the Roman Empire. So she didn't really do anything great for Egypt itself. The Egyptian dynasty that we know that was great had fallen far before that, the time of Cleopatra. So these are the controlled storytelling about Egypt. And then we see the constant whitewashing of Egyptian history as well, which has turned many Africans off from even considering Egypt as a part of Africa. Again, this is all part of the war on African people. And when it comes to African history, so controlling the narrative controls us the resources, it controls the knowledge. And when even in there, this African Enlightenment period that we're having now, you still have to rely on Eurocentric scholarship and sources. Okay. There are many honest ones as well. I mean, we go back to Greek philosophers like Herodotus, like Aristotle, who constantly are telling you that the Egyptians were black. Strabo, people who came into Egypt, because the ancient Greeks, particularly, the ancient Greeks were not people who were what we call today racist. They came into Egypt for studying, searching for knowledge, asking the priests and the ministers for their knowledge. Okay. Um, and a lot of the knowledge that we know today is also based on Black history. You're talking about um, the Moors. The Moors ruling Spain for over 700 years. The things that the Moors instituted, they instituted writing, they instituted reading to a 96% illiteracy rate in Spain. These Moors, when they came into Spain, the hygiene was terrible, 96% illiteracy rate. They instituted papyrus, they instituted paper, writing, universities. They instituted better health, better hygiene. They built many universities, schools, temples, and they also allowed freedom of worship. So these were things that Africans contributed to Europe. Okay. And there's evidence of the Moors in Italy and how Lisbon was considered to be one of the most beautiful cities in all of Europe at the time. And this is where the Moors ruled. So when you go back and you understand, there was a constant reverence for ancient Africans in the ancient days. These things started to change in the 1700s, especially when it was extremely important to colonize Africa for resources, Council of Berlin, Scramble at Africa, the Berlin Conference, Scramble for Africa, excuse me. These things were imperative to declare war on African history and to somewhat change the narrative and say, hey, these weren't African people. They were Middle Eastern or Caucasian or dark-skinned Caucasian people, what they talk about when they talk about Egypt. And it's very important to know that even the name Egypt, and I learned this from master teacher Kaba Kabane, that even the name Egypt is derived from Egupatos, which is a Greek word, which is also derived from Hikopatah, which is an African word. So these are things that, again, the war on Black history has suppressed us from knowing. Now, is this information just important just for Black people to know? No, because for this information to fly like this, the whole world has to be miseducated. The whole world has to believe that anything significant that has come into the world today did not come from Black people. This is what Eurocentric scholarship has taught us all. And if a people does not believe that you did anything great in your history, that's where you see situations like George Floyd. That's why you see situations like this fool who came into Tops and killed all of pillars of the Black community in Buffalo, New York, right here. That's where you see lynching and hangings and, but these same people that were hung, that were tortured, castrated, they have the essence of the pyramid builders. These plantation dwellers have the exact same essence of the pyramid builders. I'll say that again. And it's very interesting to know, same people who were building pyramids and are the same people who built up America, built off the hands and knowledge of African people. Did you know that Christopher Columbus used the same sailing tactics as the Moors, following the stars? In fact, some of the ships that he used were Moorish ships. But it's told to us that Africans could not produce boats to travel the oceans. Did you know that Africans were in America thousands of years before Columbus stepped foot in America? Did you know that Africans knew that the world was round thousands of years before Europeans knew? So these are historical facts. These are historical facts. You have Mansa Musa holding a solid gold globe in his hand. How did Mansa Musa know that the world was a sphere? So these are things that need to be known. These are things that need to be known when it comes to history. Christian, it says we need a reputable establishment or to establish one that's trusted to influence our people and to show truth. It's unfortunate we don't have faith to believe, but believe by sight. By seeing progression or success, our history has been burned, hidden, or destroyed for the purpose of conquering the true kings and queens. Absolutely agree with you, my brother. Absolutely agree. When you're going to make a plan, when the Council of Berlin happened, when the Scramble of Africa happened, there had to be a shift when it came to knowledge. You see, Europeans in the Middle East, they were quite aware of the great things that our Africans were doing. In fact, there's 14th century maps of Africa in glory, considered to be the Eden of the earth at that time. And as we start to see that change as time progressed on, we see these immense civilizations in Western Africa, in Northern Africa, in Central Africa, on these ancient maps. And then all of a sudden, Africa starts becoming smaller and smaller and smaller on later maps. And we start to see borders dividing Africa. And it was very important for the development of the Western world we know as America today to control the storytelling about Africa. For Africans in America to think that Africa had nothing to offer them. And we see a lot of African people in America today who would say they will claim everything but Africa, but being African, because of this miseducation, because the media shows you this impoverished Africa, these children with big bellies and flies flying around their heads saying, help, help, send your donation. These are the things that led to where we are today. But as we come forth with a new awakening, understanding Kush, understanding Kemet, understanding the Moors, understanding, ancient Africans in the Bible stories, understanding Examite Kingdom, understanding Mali, understanding the Zulu, understanding Great Benin, understanding the Great Zimbabwe, understanding the Shona people who built stone structures without mortar. You can't understand it from a Eurocentric perspective. You cannot understand African phenomenon coming from a European perspective. So I want to give a shout out to all my listeners out there today coming on. This is part 1 to the War on Black History. We'll get a little bit deeper. If you're interested in joining my next conversation on this, I usually pop in here for about a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes. Don't want to do too much. This is not a history lesson, but this is just something to activate your mind to thinking more on a deeper level on the things that's really happened right here in the United States of America. This is African historian Emmanuel Kulu. Thank you guys all for listening. Please go subscribe to IBP Media on YouTube and make sure you support us by following us on AAARIA on LinkedIn. Just follow us. That's all it is. Doesn't cost you anything. Just follow us and support our posts and share our posts as we spread the knowledge of African history. That is Ancient African Antiquities Research Institute of America. And our goal is to restore, reclaim, and reveal the key missing piece to the human story, Mama Africa. Thank everybody for supporting, and we will see you next week. Much love and Ashe.